Hello everyone and welcome to the Africa Museum podcast, the podcast channel for the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Belgium. My name is Gabrielle Fenton, and for this series I've been walking around the museum's labs, offices and archives to meet with scientists who work here. Each scientist had to choose one object that is somehow related to their research. It could be an object that they have worked on or with, or an object that simply carries a bit of their passion for their field. Some of these objects are on display in the museum, others belong to the nitty-gritty of everyday research. All of these objects have an interesting story, and that is what we are out to find out. Growing up to 60 meters tall, a tree called Afromosia is one of the tallest trees in the Congolese rainforest. Why is this timber species so popular in Europe and China? And when does heavy international trade become detrimental to a tree species? In this episode, we discover what scientists can do to protect endangered species with Niels Boerland, who is an expert in sustainable forest management. Africa Museum podcast. So we're here at the museum on a sunny afternoon and we're meeting with Niels Boerland. Hello, Niels.
Hello.
So Niels, you're a wood biologist here at the museum, and the object that you've chosen to speak with us is one which is exhibited in the museum, and it's a log. It's a big log that's about 1 cubic meter. It's about half a meter's length. And so, do you know how heavy this log is about?
Oh yes, it should be around 1 ton.
1 ton?
Yeah, maybe
Wow.
a little bit less, but close to 1 ton.
Okay. And so can you first tell us what tree species it's from? And I hear there's quite an extravagant story behind this log making it to the museum. Can you briefly tell us that story?
Yeah, the species is Pericopsis elata. So this is the scientific name. But it is traded under the Afromosia if it comes from DRC, for instance, or Asamela if it comes from Cameroon. So those are the trade name, let's say. And the story behind that is that this species is a flagship species in tropical Africa. And the museum is invested time for years, working on this species, on the management of this species, on the sustainability of the trade in this species. So that's the reason why, we decided to bring this species to be on display here in the museum. And the story was that we decided to have a piece of this species, and we decided to have a log of it, because the log can be really impressive, it can be really big, it's quite more than 10 cubic meters, even 20 sometimes. It can be really, really impressive. And so we decided at the time to collect this, to go to Africa to select a standing tree with a logging company, and to make it available for the museum. Mm-hmm. And first of all, we had to meet first challenge was to decide where and with which partner. A logging company, okay, fine, but it's not easy to find a logging company which is really and truly involved in sustainable management. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are into that. So we could find one, Compagnie Forestière de Transformation. They are quite active. They are operating close to Kisangani in DRC. And it was really interesting because this is the main, the main forest where the species occurs. Those forests are, just around Kisangani. So that was really, really good. And I could go, I had a very good contact with them. They allowed me to enter the concession, to select the standing tree, to assist to all the steps coming from the cutting of the tree, the felling of the tree, and then all steps you can imagine, bringing the logs to the road, then loading the logs on the truck, bringing it to the Congo River, putting it on a ship, bringing it to Kinshasa, and then to Matadi, and then to Belgium. So, but the log was too heavy, definitely, was too large, too big, too heavy to be on display in the new museum. And so we decided to keep only 1 ton of it, which means more or less 1 cubic meter. It's a little bit.
And the original one was how long?
Oh, it was something like 13 cubic meters as far as I remember. And the log was almost 12 meters long.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite big.
That's impressive.
Exactly. And the remaining of this log went to the Botanical Garden maze for the new wood museum. Yep.
Okay. And so if we look at this particular log, you as a wood biologist, is there any characteristics of this log that mean that you know that it's from this species instead of from another species?
Okay, so actually I'm not a wood biologist. I work for the Wood Biology Service, but I'm much more into forest management.
Okay.
But as a manager of those forests, I can identify really easily the standing trees because the bark is completely specific. I mean, the design, the colors, everything. It looks like a leopard, the skin of this kind of animal. So you have spots of colors like this. It's really, really easy. Now, when I have to see a log and I have to decide whether this is the species or not, if some bark remain, then it helps me. Otherwise, indeed, the color of the wood can help, and also some characteristics of this wood area. I have some tricks, but I mean, there are.
But you definitely know when you look at this, you know for sure this is what it is.
Because I'm used to that.
Because you're used to it. Yeah.
But I mean, my colleagues who are really specialists in wood biology, in wood anatomy, they have some features to have a look at, and they are really specific. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
For some species you have doubts, but not for this species.
And so when you went to find this particular one, so it was like 11 meters tall, and that's about the size that they all are when they're full size. So
actually, you have to know that this was the length of the log.
Okay.
So only a part of the trunk, if you want. But it's a very tall tree. It's one of the tallest trees in this kind of deciduous or semi-deciduous rainforest.
Yeah.
That's really the place where it occurs. And you have to have a lot of rain. So rainforest, I said it. And it's a canopy tree. So, I mean, it's really a dominant tree at the latest development stages. It reaches the canopy, and even it dominates the canopy, so it can go up to 60 meters tall.
Wow.
I mean, the total height.
Yeah.
50 meters, it's really common. I mean, 45, 50 meters, and even more than that. But the diameter, you have to know that it doesn't reach such very, very, big diameters like other species in those forests. It dies. The senescence occurs more or less when the tree reaches 170 centimeters dBH, so diameter, breast height.
Okay.
And you have other trees, you can go up to 4 or 5 meters diameter. So it's not that big, but it goes high.
But
really.
It's very tall.
Yeah. And it's really light demanding. This is also something really
That's important.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the reasons why you've chosen to talk to us about this log today is because this tree is currently being heavily logged for trade and is on the CITES Appendix 2 list. Did I pronounce CITES right? Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah?
You did well.
Okay. Yeah. So CITES stands for the Convention for International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora.
Indeed.
So it's endangered. So how does a tree get onto the Appendix 2 list? As in, like, how endangered must a tree species be in order to be on the Appendix 2 list? Okay,
the first criteria that you have to be aware of is that if there is international trade involved or not. I mean, if the wood is just used locally, or I mean,
such as like firewood or
I don't know, for constructions, for villages, for instance, and you do not export it. I mean, it doesn't cross the border. Then I mean, if it's only a national use of the wood, it doesn't regard. I mean, it has nothing to do with CITES. So CITES only focuses on what is this convention, focuses on what is going on when you have international trade. And so this is the first thing. And the second thing is, how is this population, I mean the target population, going on? If you export wood, this means that you are felling trees in the forest. Mm-hmm. And so you are damaging or you are harvesting some mm-hmm. individuals in a population. And you have to understand how far you are putting pressure in terms of survival of this population. If you have to imagine, if you have a very big population with so many individuals and you just collect a little bit, it's obvious that the trade won't be detrimental to the population. But when it comes, when you are harvesting quite a lot, or let's say in a not sustainable way, and then you have to assess the impact of trade mm-hmm. on this population. And when scientists have the feeling that it could put such a pressure that the population would at one moment become really endangered and maybe possibly at a very extreme stage disappear, then you have to intervene before. And this is what is about the Appendix 2. Appendix 2 means that you can trade, but you have to monitor trade to be 100% sure that the trade is not detrimental to the survival of the population. And at one moment, there were serious doubts about the impact of this international trade on the wild, so those wild populations in Africa, because it's only in Africa. And you have to know that decades ago, 20, 30 years ago, because of logging, the species disappeared from a whole country, which is Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. And this was a very big warning.
Yeah.
We learned from this drama, and we didn't want that to replicate this situation, and so the scientists decided to bring this case to CITES, and then there's a long process.
And so, as you said, so the scientists bring this case to CITES. How much are sort of local authorities or national governments and involved in also sort of giving their opinion on how endangered the species is, or how sustainable the harvesting is?
The efficiency of listing a species into the appendix is this efficiency is much higher when the proponent is one of the range state. But it can be that for many reasons that the range state doesn't have, for instance, the skills or the willingness or whatever to be the proponent. Then an importing country can also do that. I think that all countries that are in this convention can do that. But of course, if it comes from range state or from an importing country, or both of those, then it's much stronger. And at the very origin, I don't remember which party was the proponent of this listing, but it was in the 90s, mm-hmm. as far as I remember, that it was listed. So it's an old story. And I guess that the case of Côte d'Ivoire was a really, really strong...
And so that was before the 90s, the case of Côte d'Ivoire?
Oh, yeah. It was in the 70s, 60s.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the golden age of the logging at the time, making a lot of money and didn't care about the forest, really.
So when we look at there's different... could you take us through the different steps of the trading of the Pericopsis elata?
Maybe just one thing to be quite clear, because I have to be careful. So the listing of Pericopsis elata wasn't decided only because of logging.
Okay.
It was also decided because if you have a look at the haute ecology, the ecology of the species, it's well known that the species doesn't regenerate well
Okay.
in the forest where it occurs.
Yeah.
It is strange but it is because it's a light-demanding species.
Okay.
And all those rainforests are really closed canopies forest, and you don't have that much light going to the understory. And then the seedlings, I mean, at one moment they die because of this lack of light and so on and so forth. So the fact that the species was suffering from regeneration problems was also a very strong driver.
Okay.
So to be clear, not only logging, but the combining of logging and ecological problems.
The characteristics of this particular tree. Yeah. Okay. So could you take us through the different steps
how does it work with the trade?
Before we talk about that, could you just tell us what is it that we use this tree for? What do we import it for internationally? Who imports it internationally?
Okay, it's a timber species, definitely. So what is interesting is the wood.
Yeah.
And what is really interesting is that it's the characteristics of the wood, technological characteristics, for instance, are really nice. Again, the fact that you can use this wood inside or outside, it can withstand to be under the rain. It doesn't get rotten easily, so this is really interesting. You can have this parquet in your bathroom if you have the money for that. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's just nice. It can withstand that. This high level of humidity, and for the decking of a yacht, luxury yachts and things like that. So it's a high value timber species for the African continent.
So who are the main importers?
The main importers are China, definitely today. Nowadays. But Europe is quite a big, importing region. And within Europe, you have Belgium, definitely. I can imagine that maybe the first importing country in volumes. And France, Germany, a bit Italy and Spain. I guess those are the main importers.
So it works well with our humidity here in Belgium.
Yes, that might be the reason. Historically, I'm not quite sure, but this is one thing.
Yeah. And so, could you take us through the different steps of this trade, like the different actors from when it's felled in a forest to when it gets to Belgium, for example?
Okay, so you have really it's all the time the same steps that you have to go through. The first one is that you have to have an inventory in the forest. So this is the logging company having this forest inventory so as to locate the individuals that may be harvested afterwards. If you do things in a sustainable way, you have to have a sustainable management of the species. Some companies have it, others not really or not seriously, but let's say most of the company hopefully do that seriously. And then you have located the resources where you will, what you will harvest, right? What you will be felling. And then you have to have those fellers coming to the forest and going where you said you can fell down this tree, fell the tree, cutting down. And with this chainsaw, felling the trees.
Yeah.
And afterwards, you have to bring the log with a bulldozer most of the time, which is bringing the log to the road.
Okay.
Close to a road, and then the log has to be loaded on a truck. Then it goes out of the forest. It goes to, depending if there's a sawmill. If it goes to be processed, it will be processed. Transformed wood. It goes to the sawmill, and then the sawn wood is exported, or the log can be exported as well.
Okay.
This is a possibility, and you have to know that if it's a good logging company, you have a whole traceability system from the standing tree, so from the stump, to the container, exporting harbor.
And so, is this part of the rules that are involved in sort of protecting the species, this traceability? Like, so what sort of restrictions and rules are put in place once a tree is on the Appendix 2 list?
Okay, you have to, the management authority and the scientific authority of the exporting country has to emit a permit, export permit. And they can do that once they they have evidences that this traded volume is not detrimental to the population. So, the scientists have to investigate if these volumes, because when you have a volume, when you have logs, it's really easy because then you see that those were individuals in the forest. But if you have sawn wood, you also have to be able to assess more or less the number of individuals that you needed to harvest to get this volume of sawn wood, for instance. So you have to have transformation rates and so on and so forth. So you have to proceed to some computations. You have to assess the sustainability, the impact of the trade, the impact of the logging, and is it done with a management plan, for instance? How is the inventory done, and so on and so forth. And at one moment, you can have, for instance, a national quota, which is computed, and this is what you allow your logging companies to export each year. And this is sent by the exporting country. This quota, this evaluation, is sent to the secretariat of CITES secretariat, and for approval, and then you can proceed. And so you have to be able to compute all the volumes that you export. It's not just that you let wood going out, and you have to know exactly where it comes from, and how many cubic meters, how many standing trees, and so on and so forth.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Definitely.
Is there perhaps something that you can suggest people to read or to look at if they want to hear more about this subject and about CITES and about wood trade?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something which is really interesting, and if people have a look on internet, they can find information dealing with that, is the history of those forests. Because today we are logging big trees.
Yeah.
And because it's prohibited by law to have to log small individuals or at early stages, let's say. But so we are logging big trees, but the species doesn't regenerate well. So how could be possible that those big trees became big trees if it doesn't regenerate? This is a very nice story to learn about, and you can find this about the history of those forests, and having this those words, Pericopsis elata, history, forest, something like that. You will find really some interesting. It's a very nice story.
Good.
And
well,
the human being is involved, but
making us
centuries ago.
Yeah. Cool. That's a good thing to end on. Thank you very much, Niels, for
You're
your
welcome.
time.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you for listening to the Africa Museum podcast. Have you heard of a fish losing their teeth as a feeding strategy? Are you wondering why that would make sense in an evolutionary context? Listen in next episode as we discuss the fish species Haplochromis relictidens with fish biologist Nathan Rankin. This series is brought to you by the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Belgium, which is a museum and a cross-disciplinary scientific institution with over 80 scientists from biology, earth sciences and social sciences conducting research on Africa and its heritage around the world.